I'm the co-executor of Kurt's estate, and everything Kurt wrote, everything that he created, is owned by a copyright trust, and I'm the sole trustee. Buddy, agent, lawyer, we just happened to be in the right place at the right time when we met Kurt. It just happened, we became very friendly. He had a need for someone to do what I was doing, and I was having a good time, you know, doing what I do. Annie and I are friendly with all my clients. They're not just clients, they're friends of ours. With Kurt, it just was easy I started doing things for him. The first thing you know, I started helping him pay his bills, and I started taking care of a lot of things for him, and we just became very close, and we started being invited to all of their social affairs, the weddings, and we were family.
He was different with us. He was very warm and friendly, and you know, would tell jokes, and we just had good times with him.
We used to play tennis together. Kurt Vonnegut and I, two old codgers, we're playing against our sons, who are vigorously strong young men, and we win the first 2 games, or 3 games, I think. And then they won the next game, and as we went back and Kurt's turn to serve, Kurt says to me, "Let's fall on the ball and run out the clock."
I always ended up laughing. There was always something he would say that's funny. I mean, you know, I'd call him up to tell him, I just got a check for several $100,000, but I also got a check for $1.57 from someone, you know, for something I'd licensed. And he'd say, "Better than a poke in the eye." You know, well, I'd end up laughing.
Although had perhaps the most extravagant sense of humor of any 20th century writer, and was imaginative, inventive, Kurt Vonnegut, as we know, he was a man of absolute fidelity and truth. In the most elementary situation, if you said somebody is very ill and Kurt's going to go visit him, Kurt's not going to say, "You look great."
Kurt was the same person with a guy he would meet on a bench a few blocks from his house that he was with our young son when he was sitting in this chair here. He was the same when he's talking to some of the famous people he met as he was with someone who was not someone of any importance socially. There were so many terrible things that happened in this world and were happening and continue to happen that upset Kurt beyond belief, and the only way he could deal with it was to treat it humorously. And that's why he always looked for something that was funny.
I'm not going to define a Vonnegut for you. I got to see the original. Kurt really invented, I think, his own style. It was the play of fantasy and reality, and also the play with language and the humor on every page. So, some people just didn't get that this book had all of his books had a profound underlying passion and a unity of theme, the madness of our destruction to each other. He tapped in, I think, I don't think it's an over-exaggeration, 2 of the major currents of the 20th century. One was the futility of war, the enormous response to mayhem and death, which he had experienced at Slaughterhouse 5, because we fought that war against Hitler, and winning that war certainly made sense, and the sacrifices involved in it. That's the other side. But the Vonnegut perception, having been an American soldier and been in the Stalag and seen the destruction of Dresden and felt it so intimately, he saw the destructiveness of war as a totality. And his feeling about it, which was reflected during Vietnam particularly, was that this is nuts. Why are people killing each other? Why are we murdering each other? And it's a point of view that many young people adapted. And he put it in an almost spiritual context by moving through time. He extended the imaginative leap so that you weren't just dealing with a counter-argument. You were putting it within a broad context of the universe.
I get quite a few people send me their writings because they think I want to represent them as their attorney agent because they write like Kurt. I don't need anybody who writes like Kurt. I don't want anybody who writes like Kurt. I got Kurt who writes like Kurt, plus the fact nobody writes like Kurt except Kurt. So, you know, that's a bunch of crap. I write like Kurt. Who would want to represent somebody who writes like him when I represent him who writes like him?
He thought every page had to have a gag. There had to be something on it to make the reader want to turn the page. And he worked like that. He worked intensely. His concept of humor played through his life. He was always thinking about it in terms of a flip. He was just a marvelous, ironic commentator. And that, I think, made the power of his books.
I don't think anybody is really capable of properly describing Kurt accurately in every way because he was such a complicated individual. I came up with a description which his friends that I've mentioned it to are accurate, but even that doesn't say it. But he was a closet optimist. He didn't want to appear to be, because the way he attacked things that were terrible in the world was to call them to one's attention, and he couldn't appear to be hopeful, but he was.
Kurt really looked at things, and I wasn't aware. It's a little self-effacing, but it's true. I never really looked up. I mean, I would look at the sky occasionally, but I just didn't study buildings. I would do it, you know, when you were on a tour or you're on a you're a tour somewhere, vacation tours. You're looking up and seeing the cathedrals. Kurt was always doing that. It was all with a sense of wonder and responsiveness. And that's an aspect of Vonnegut that is so unlike a depressed person, I think. He responded to the physical world and to people. He rejoiced in the simple encounters.
20th century Mark Twain.
Mm-hmm. Right now, the contemporary writers, there are very few that are 100% in print. Kurt's 100% in print. And in my view, the reason for that is he's multi-generational. And I think that's part of the reason his books will be read for a long time, because what he says speaks to a lot of generations, and they're pretty universal themes.
Of all the people I've known, he was so unique. And it was the uniqueness of the style was in the company that I do really miss that. There's nobody quite like that. Kurt was more Indianapolis than New York. The soul was always there because he referred to it. I mean, we all do. That's part of our psyche. I mean, his family links were very powerful. His feelings about the town, Indianapolis, were very powerful. And I think he integrated it into much of his work because that's who he was. And Kurt was a guy who did not reinvent himself. He was who he was. The fascinating dichotomy there is that he seemed to reinvent himself to survive because of that Dresden experience. I mean, there's a guy who was buried alive and came up and had to bury people when you think of what he did. But the other side is that his soul was where he was born.
He never forgot the fact he was from Indiana. He was a Hoosier.
His work will always come through because people can read him and understand him. I've seen it because I saw one of my sons, my younger son, read him with great admiration. And I saw my grandchildren. I mean, not all of them, but a couple of them read him. So the guy is really accessible. And I was just lucky that he was accessible to me. One of the great breaks. I hit a long shot.